Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and an art professor. And in this video, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite drawing techniques, black and white, pen and ink on toned paper. I'm going to explain what makes this technique so effective, show you some amazing old master examples, and demonstrate a few different ways it can be done. Let's get started. I think when most drawing connoisseurs think of drawings done on toned paper, they picture work done with chalks, such as the brawny, billowy figures of Tintoretto or the delicate confections of Watteau. But there is a long tradition of using toned paper with pen and ink, particularly in the German school of the 15th and 16th centuries. The most famous proponent of this way of working was, of course, Albrecht Dürer, though many of his drawings on toned paper were actually done with a brush. But I'm going to take this opportunity to show some work from a lesser-known artist who deserves more recognition, Hans Baldung Grien. Having received his training in Dürer's workshop, he developed a powerful and uniquely personal style, and his many works on toned paper are a persuasive demonstration of the potential of this technique to create a wide range of effects. While Dürer preferred to work on mid-tone blue paper, either paper made from blue cloth fibers or white paper that was afterwards covered with blue paint, Hans Baldung Grien worked on a larger range of paper colors. For example, this drawing, probably his most famous, called The Witches, which is done on a dark brown surface which allows the highlights to glimmer with a silvery intensity, imbuing the scene with a smoky Gothic atmosphere befitting the subject. This delicate drawing of a fashionable youth was done on dark turquoise paper, which is so subtle that it takes time for the eyes to adjust to it. But if you look at it carefully to fully take in its secrets, you'll see that the highlights on the face were actually done in pink. Grien would also occasionally work on very dark paper, such as this, creating these mysterious images where the intricate hatching in the highlights is doing most of the work, giving the impression that the forms are emerging from the murky depths of the drawing. The ability to choose the surface color is one of the advantages of this technique. Working on toned paper allows the artist to set the overall mood, the way a composer of music sets the key and orchestration of their musical pieces. 4-5. Now let's discuss materials. There are a large number of toned paper options available on the market, and one of my favorites is made by Strathmore. This paper is available in sketchbooks of different sizes, both book-bound and wire-bound, and is also sold in large, loose sheets. These come in two tones, a toned neutral gray and a toned tanned. Both have a smooth multimedia paper that takes pen and ink very, very well. If you want to work on other colors, then a great option is the CAnson Mi-Tientes, which is available in a huge range of colors in loose sheets. This paper is advertised for dry media and does have a medium tooth surface designed to take chalky materials like pastel pencils. But the surface also takes pen and ink and washes very well. However, you can also easily create your own toned paper by washing over either multimedia paper or hot press watercolor paper, either with ink or watercolor washes. This will allow you to have perfect control over the color you're working on and has the added benefit of introducing a touch of expressive color complexity to your drawing surfaces. You can also, and I know this might be surprising for some of you, apply soft chalk pastels to your paper and then rub them down with a paper towel. This is a great method when you're working on a drawing paper that isn't designed for wet media that buckles with heavy applications of wash. And it works surprisingly well, like the ink wash, creating a beautifully varied drawing surface. Here's a little drawing I did over it as a proof of concept. Unless the toned paper is on the lighter side, you'll want to choose a darker ink, either black or some kind of dark brown or sepia. Otherwise, you'll have difficulty getting enough contrast. As for the white, I recommend white drawing ink. Yes, there are a huge number of white gel pens and markers on the market, but though I haven't tried them all, I've tried enough to conclude that they lack opacity, showing up only on very dark papers, and even then, not all that well. For fountain pens, there is a white ink available, DeAtramantis Document White. And it works moderately well, but is very prone to clogging and is high maintenance, requiring you to clean the pen every few days. I have this ink in my TWSBI ECO, a good choice since it can be disassembled easily for a full cleaning. I give this ink a positive review, and while it's a good option for fountain pen lovers, it's only worth the hassle if you really need something portable. For studio work, I would stick to white drawing ink. It's the cheapest option, entirely hassle-free, and it'll give you the absolutely best results. Any dip pen designed for drawing will do. I usually use a nib made by Hunt, their Globe 513EF, which has an extra fine tip and just a touch of flexibility. I recommend keeping things separate by having two dip pens, one for white ink and one for black ink. This will prevent you from contaminating your white ink and make it easier to switch back and forth. Now let's talk technique. There are a number of ways of working on toned paper, but here is the most important principle, which I'm going to demonstrate by doing a simple value scale. In this case, the paper is approximately 50% gray, so I'm going to start off with a mid-tone and go darker using my black ink, of course. So let's apply a layer of hatching here. We can go a little bit lighter with some reverse writing here. And then we're going to go darker here by adding an additional hatch layer. Darker still. And let's put down one more layer. Okay, now let's go lighter using our white ink. If I want my transition from shadow to light to be gradual, I need to separate my black and my white ink. So I'm going to start my white not quite right up against the black. I'm going to start it here. And then, just like the black ink, build up my values with layers of hatch. So I'm going to change the angle. Go a little bit lighter here. Let's put down a few more layers. And one more layer. So, what have we learned from this process? Well, that there's a transitional area between the black and white inks where we only see the paper. This means that any time we need to transition from shadow to light, one of the values in our drawing will be the value of the paper. That is the most important aspect of working on toned paper. Let the paper be one of the values in your drawing. So, if the paper is mid-tone, as it is here, then I will make sure that every time I have a mid-tone in my drawing, I will keep it free of either black or white ink. So, if we're doing a drawing of a sphere, and that sphere is lit from above, like so, and we have a light break separating the shadows and lights here, and a cast shadow. There's going to be certain parts of the sphere where I'm going to have neither black nor white ink. That might be in the reflected lights here. That might be in the separation between lights and darks, which is called the halftone, right about here. We might also have a little bit of the paper value in the cast shadow. That's going to be determined. So let's start off by putting down a little bit of shadow. It would help to outline the sphere first. Okay, and let's start hatching right here and putting down a little bit of shadow value. Okay, let's go a little bit darker and see if we can leave the paper value in that reflected light. Let's go a little bit darker. We're going to change the angle here and put in our core shadow. That's the darker part of the body shadow in the sphere. That might look like this. Now let's put in the cast shadow, which maybe in this case is going to start very dark. Cast shadows tend to be darker at the point of origin. And then it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter as it moves away from the casting object. So let's go darker here. And gradually, little by little, lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, now let's add some white ink. So this area getting hit by light is going to have a lighter value. But as the sphere starts curving away from the light source, it gets darker and darker and darker until we have the halftone. I want to make sure that the paper value shines through underneath the white and is the halftone in my drawing. So we're going to go lighter here. And just like the darks, build up my values little by little with a series of hatching at different angles. And let's say our highlight is going to be somewhere here on the sphere. Now, light might also be hitting the table. So let's put a little bit of hatching on the table itself. Now in this case, because cast shadows are abrupt, they have sharp edges, we can have white and black ink right up against each other. Here too, for example, right? White and black ink could be right up against each other. In those areas, we're not going to see any paper value transition. That only occurs where the transition is gradual, where we have a gradient, like we do here or here. Now here we have cast shadow. It is darker, but I'm going to let the paper value be the lightest aspect of the cast shadow. And the way I'm going to make it pop out is by putting lighter values around it. And now that we have a lighter value around the gray of the paper, it starts looking dark, like it's part of the cast shadow. Make this lightest light of the sphere a little bit lighter and finish our drawing. So you can see how much of the paper value is shining through the drawing in the reflected light, in the lightest part of the cast shadow, and then this is probably the trickiest aspect, that little bit of paper value coming through between the lights and the darks of my drawing. The value of the paper will also determine the balance between the black and white inks. For example, on lighter paper, most of the drawing will be done with the black ink, with the white ink only being used in the brightest areas. On a dark piece of paper, the drawing is done mostly with white ink, with the black used minimally, only appearing in the darkest parts of the shadows. This is, of course, only if you're looking for a full range of contrast, something not always desirable. In our social media age, when art is viewed by scrolling through a bunch of little squares on a phone, Contrast is king, and in response, many artists make their work as contrasting as possible to attract attention. Loud, full contrast drawings have their place, but there are times when a subject calls for you to be subtle, to create something very light and airy, or something very dark and gloomy, and such work can be intensely moving, even if it doesn't read well on a tiny digital screen. Let's do a drawing inspired by Hans Baldung Grien and work on dark brown paper. In this case, I'm going to wash over the paper in my CAnson Multimedia Sketchbook with Liquitex brown waterproof ink. This paper, though it's designed to take aqueous media, does buckle slightly when the washes are heavily applied. But if I close the sketchbook and put a book on top of it, creating gentle pressure, it'll flatten out in a few hours. Working on darker paper is a bit challenging since I'm used to working on either mid-tone or lighter tone paper. However, I really like the glowing effects Hans Baldung Grien achieved with a strong contrast to white ink over darker paper, so I wanted to give it a shot. After some experimentation, I arrived at using a carbon pencil to do the underdrawing. Graphite is too light a material and doesn't show clearly on this dark surface, and it turned out that white chalk, for some strange reason, interferes with a dip pen's ability to put down lines. Carbon pencil is dark, doesn't smear as much as charcoal, and erases easily, making it the best choice. I'm starting with black ink and have to be careful not to add too much of it, since a large part of this drawing will be done with white ink and I need to leave room. That said, if there are some areas where the white and black inks overlap, it's not going to ruin the drawing, just make it a touch messier looking. Again, the key here is to think about what values in the drawing will be represented by the paper, and in this case, since the paper is on the darker side, it's going to be the general value of the shadow. This means that anything that is lighter than this value will have white in it, perhaps even the reflected lights. While this technique works with any of the hatching methods, here I'm going to use cross-contour hatching with lots of curly C-shaped lines as a nod to Hans Baldung Grien and his teacher Albrecht Dürer. The hatching in black ink was fairly simple to apply because, again, there wasn't quite as much of it, and the dark paper made the hatching look much softer, making the process more forgiving. The white ink, on the other hand, was challenging, since the contrast between the white and the darker paper made the lines very prominent. As a result, I was forced to slow down and be much more deliberate in my hatching methods, building up the layers gradually and making sure that the strokes were as form-following as possible. Since more of the value is rendered with white ink, more hatching layers are applied, and the highlights are applied quite thickly with either very short hatch marks or stipples, which serve to mimic the rough and irregular texture of highlights on the skin. Here is my completed drawing. I have to say, I didn't help my cause much by selecting this very difficult drawing angle. I do need to practice drawing heads from this challenging vantage point, but I think when challenging yourself, one must choose a single challenge at a time. You can choose a challenging subject, but pair it with an easier technique. Or choose a challenging technique, but an easier subject. But pairing a challenging subject with a medium you're not entirely used to might be overwhelming. That said, for a demo in front of the camera, it's not a bad effort, if I do say so myself. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, please subscribe and stay tuned to many more like it. Thanks for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.